This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued remains. Sandia National Laboratories Long-Term Nuclear Waste Warning Message. The Daily Grind, Chapter 182. You know, James said from the back of the van he was sitting in, I actually expected my dramatic gesture to make this faster, not slower. He was leaning with his back against the interior wall of the van, one leg dangling out of the open back doors toward the street, idly juggling a trio of small blue orbs with magically enhanced precision. A single rogue cloud had crossed over the path of the sun, and the temperature had then dropped 10 degrees, which somehow hadn't changed how the day felt. Dave and Frequency of Sunlight were sitting deeper in the van, playing some compact card game that Dave had brought, while Alex was farther into the van's depths, giving Pendragon belly rubs while the dragon rolled against the expanded confines of the van's inner walls. James briefly wondered what it would look like outside. Would the van rock every time Pendragon moved like that? Did it take proportionally more energy from her, here inside this orange totem warped space, to produce the normal effect outside of it? The thought distracted him for a good minute or so, which was good because no one had bothered to respond to his comment. James gurgled something dramatically, a long "erg" noise as he tipped his head back to repeatedly tap the metal frame of the van with his skull. I should have brought a laptop or something, he complained. I'm bored. Why am I so bored? Because having nothing to do while also having the upcoming tension of potential confrontation amplifies the feeling of helplessness, Dave said, in a voice like he had rehearsed that line a few hundred times, before he added another card to the pile on the cargo bay floor. Also, 3 here, 2 there. Get rid of your thing. He pointed over at a card on Frequency's side of their game. The girl made her own unhappy noise, though it was really more of a disgruntled hiss than a groan, as she awkwardly plucked the single card to place it into her growing discard pile. I don't even know the rules to this, Frequency of Sunlight complained. There's a copy in pen. You can just look them up through the link. That's what I'm doing, Dave said. It's hard, the Camerconda exclaimed. So, you been enjoying the stakeouts? James asked Dave casually. His friend hummed softly. No, Dave said. I'm bored all the time, and we're on a telepad budget, so I'm not even getting to go to work while I'm doing this. It's been weeks since I got to give a golden retriever a bath. What? Frequency of Sunlight started to say something before pausing her digital voice. How do you bathe others? She asked, in a casual tone that was way too suspicious. Depends on how energetic the golden retriever is, I guess, Dave answered, missing all subtext. James sighed. Sonny, a golden retriever is a breed of dog, and for the other bit, I'll give you a real answer later. Dave, are you still working at the animal shelter? Yes? While raising Pendragon, and working response shifts, and being a knight of the Order of Endless Rooms, and a billion other things, I assume? James added, knowing how his friend was. Yeah, that sounds about right, Dave said. Wait, is this about how busy things are? JP complained about this too. You aren't allowed to complain about how much I do. I've already prepared a defensive list of the 16 different jobs you have. James scratched a bit of grit out of the corner of his eye. I appreciate that you consider me highly enough to preemptively counter my arguments, he said, in a kind of, yeah, you got me there, tone of voice. Hey, you know what I appreciate? Alex called from 30 feet deeper into the van. Adventure, the other 3 all muttered at once. A goddamn adventure, Alex continued. James, we've been here for 2 hours. Nothing is happening. First off, it's only been 2 hours. I admit I'm also bored, and all that stuff Dave said is probably true, but chill. James turned to look toward the picturesque suburban house outside. Give him some time. Some jackass just threw their lives into disarray. We can wait a bit. Also, Alex, bad news. You probably won't need to survive and triumph against overwhelming odds today. Bah! Alex called back. To be fair, they could be trying to run away right now, Dave pointed out. James shrugged. He offered. For one thing, I'd bet money JP already has GPS trackers in all those cars. He does. He made me put them there, Dave interrupted. And also, I don't think I care. James let out a long exhalation. Like, okay, they're dangerous, sure. But are they? I mean, they're created by killing people, but are the resulting life forms dangerous? More dangerous than a normal person, I mean. Like anyone is dangerous with a gun. Not to me, Frequency of Sunlight chimed in, twisting to wiggle her tail and show off the shield bracer that was magically resized for a camera conda body. Sure, James briefly conceded, still rolling the trio of blue orbs around in his hand. Anyway, point is, I don't know, I feel like we put a lot of time and effort into tracking these things down, and now we're just going to learn that they're not the overwhelming existential threat to the world that we think they are. And I'm having a hard time feeling angry enough to actually hunt them down if they do panic and run. Like, just let them go, you know? We have so many other things we could be doing. Also, it's rude to relentlessly pursue someone like that. Manners are important, Dave agreed with a stoic nod, apparently having taken away one specific thing from what James had just said. Frequency of Sunlight glanced up from their shared card game, back and forth between James and Dave. Why? She asked. Why what? James said, trying and failing repeatedly to spin a blue orb on his fingertip. Why are manners important? Frequency clarified. They seem to be a human mother concept, also arbitrary. James smiled a bit. Oh, that. Manners are... Okay, yeah, they're sort of arbitrary. Some of them have cultural origin points that are rooted in a specific need, though. Like, handshakes are meant to show you aren't hiding a weapon, for example. I think. That might be a myth. James cleared his throat as he backtracked through the conversation. Anyway, being arbitrary doesn't make them bad, specifically. They're meant to be... How to frame this? They're like a signal to everyone else that you want to be polite. He thought for a second and then nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. The point is that we're all sort of collectively agreeing that certain behaviors are meant to show respect or kindness or whatever. The gestures themselves don't matter, just that we've all decided what they are. And everyone decided hurting people is rude? Frequency of Sunlight asked, trying to wrap her head around the monumental task of getting 8 billion people to agree on anything. Well, I'm kind of being sarcastic, James admitted, which alleviated a lot of confusion. Manners are more about actively doing petty non-things rather than avoiding murdering people or whatever, or like, the things you avoid are the inverse, small meaningless gestures meant to signal something negative, like flipping someone off. I do that frequently, the camera conda said, looking at the floor with a sheepish expression in her lens. Manipulators are challenging. The sight of a distressed camera conda drew a small noise of pity from James. They really needed to get the ball rolling on making magic items themselves so they could start equipping the new serpentine population of the world with arms that actually helped. Not that the backpacks that engineering had been putting together weren't great, but, like Frequency had said, they took a little getting used to. Hey Dave, James said, eliciting a from his friend before he continued. You're the one that probably has the most insight into the blue orbs. Why aren't we making dungeon tech with them? Oh, we don't know how, Dave said with a shrug. Sarah says they come from totems, but she couldn't remember why she thinks that. Personally, I don't know, maybe. I actually think they're not something we can make. Oh? Yeah, they're like the traps, you know? The traps drop red orbs, but we know what reds do when they're broken, totemed and shaped, and I doubt absorbing a red turns you into an Indiana Jones problem, right? Dave shrugged. I just don't think we can make a magic item like the dungeon does. Sorry, man. Dang, because I was going to say magic camera conda arms and then do this and see what happened. He threw one of the blue orbs he was holding in an overhand arc, which Dave lazily caught out of the air, just over Frequency's snout as she traced its trajectory. Also, what does shaped mean? I would have loved magic arms, Frequency of Sunlight said off to the side. You know, made into life, Dave answered, rolling the orb in his fingers, holding it up to catch the overcast light from the open back door of the van. Like Pendragon. Hey, wait, Alex called before her thudding footsteps heralded her sliding across the van's floor to join their group, leaving an upset Pendragon behind without a source of pets. I've got it. Just make blue life. Dave and James shared a glance. Dave shrugged, but James had other plans. Alex, the blues are conceptually aspected toward being tools as far as we know, he said calmly. We don't make life to be tools. That's just not something we do. It's in the manual. No, but see, it actually makes sense, Alex breathlessly exclaimed. Half the stupid magic items have these weird fuzzy boundaries about what they can do, right? And all those weird quirks suddenly make a lot of sense if you imagine that the items are a tiny bit alive and making decisions. Like, why does the paperweight ignore force from one direction but not the orbit of the Earth? Because it's alive and not stupid. Frequency of Sunlight twisted her body, flopping her front half over her tail to stare up at James, now upside down in her field of vision. I apologize, she said. I should not have complained. Now I have a headache. Apologizing is good manners. You know, half the time I can't tell if your people are messing with me with the things that you say, James told her with a smirk. We are learning quickly, yes, Frequency of Sunlight replied with a bronze-toothed Cameronconda grin. James appreciated that more of them were becoming comfortable actually showing their fangs when they smiled. It had bothered him more than seeing the stabby rows of teeth when he'd learned that a lot of Cameroncondas didn't smile because they didn't want to alarm anyone. Guys, I'm serious, Alex said, spinning on her knees on the metal floor to face Dave. Dave, you agree with... Dave? Dave had completely checked out, and was now intently staring at the orb in his palm. A living tool, huh? He muttered. Thought-following task? Yeah, I could... Dave, no, James admonished him. And then, realizing Dave had that look in his eye of someone who was experiencing a deep insight into the mystical reality of their world, the kind of which usually ended with a breakthrough or an explosion, added, Dave, no! Dave, absolutely no. JP's voice from the street outside drew their attention, causing Dave to fumble the orb which Frequency snatched out of his grip with pretty good precision from her adopted limbs. What is Dave not doing? He asked, not waiting for an answer before adding, Also, someone's waiting for you, probably you specifically. He cocked a finger gun at James. Do you want a bodyguard for this? Not too late to just set everything on fire. Just saying. Yes, it is, James said, his voice suddenly a little hard. They're people, JP. They could be really shitty people, JP said blandly. James sighed. Alex, Sonny, you're with me. We're doing actual diplomacy, okay? So, pay attention. Let me know through the link if you notice anything I should know about, but don't be antagonistic. I would never... Understood. Frequency cut off Alex, rotating like an uncoiling spring to rise up to her normal height as she bobbed her head solemnly. Alex understands too. Hey, Good, James said, smiling. But seriously, Alex, I know you're fine. Just don't say anything stupid. That's my job. James waited until he got an affirmative nod from Alex, the girl's expression going from jokingly belligerent to serious and ready to go in a split second. He returned the nod and rolled out of the back of the van to his feet, looking at where JP nodded to see a tall Japanese man in a loose tan suit, sporting truly impressive sideburns, waiting at the end of the nearby house's front path. He looked up at the sky, shading his eyes. Checking his phone would have been easier to get the actual time, honestly, but knowing that it was getting well into midday was basically all he wanted anyway. James took a breath of fresh air, flavored differently to what he was used to at home, and then focused his sight on the waiting figure and started walking forward. Feet hit the ground behind him as Alex followed, Frequency coming after her a couple of seconds later. James didn't look back, but saw through his skulljack link as the two of them formed up on either side of him like a vanguard. Hey, he said to the man at the end of the path, the one he knew wasn't quite human anymore. You the representative? No, the potion thing said with an economical shake of its head. We have decided. Please come inside. We will talk. He sounded like he thought this was a terrible idea, but was going along with it anyway. James gave a polite nod. All right, lead the way. The occupied man turned sharply and walked ahead, pausing to hold the door open for James. He didn't say anything about the two behind him, so it seemed a pair of guests were okay. James pinged a confirmation through his skulljack back to Dave and JP that everything was fine so far, and stepped into the house. The polite "thank you" that Frequency of Sunlight said as she passed the held-open door made James realize he had just encountered a real moral dilemma. Was he supposed to take his shoes off? He always took his shoes off in homes, but he might have to throw himself through a window at a moment's notice here. What was the protocol for that? Fortunately, the decision was made for him. This way, the man said, walking through the entry hallway past a curving staircase, shoes still on. James sighed in relief and followed. He made a mental note as he passed by a wrought iron side table with what looked like a pretty expensive ikebana arrangement on it, and took similar notice of the photos of a coastline on the wall. Then they were in a wide-open room, where the polished hardwood floor met carpet, and a trio of couches had been arranged in a pleasant semicircle around the core of the room. Small touches made the place feel like a real home. Details and artwork on the walls, the well-used dishes filled with snacks laid out on the counter separating this space from the kitchen, the general atmosphere just felt comfy. 8 other human-shaped individuals and 1 golden retriever filled the space, either sitting on the couches or standing rather rigidly in a few spots around the room. The woman who James had first greeted at the front door, presumable owner of the house, was standing looking out the glass door of the back patio, and didn't turn even as James entered. The alchemist who they'd tailed here, ex-alchemist maybe, was sitting closest to the cold fireplace, rounded glass goblet of some amber liquid perched in his hand. As they walked in, several of the seated people stood wordlessly, vacating the couch that sat opposite the others to move to other seating arrangements. Please, sit, the man who'd led James in said. James looked around again, letting his brain absorb the ambience of the room and the small details of the building. Then he shrugged and moved through them, unable to avoid noticing how everyone he passed tensed up before he took a seat on the padded white cloth of the empty couch. Behind him, Alex just leaned on the back of the furniture, while Frequency coiled up to the side. Only a few of the people here were looking at him. Most of them were finding things to stare at out the windows or on the wall, or just looking down at their own hands. The dog was in some kind of staring contest with Frequency of Sunlight, which it probably wouldn't win. The atmosphere was, in a single word, tense. The room was dominated by people in their early 20s, with only a few outliers too. Okay, James broke the awkward silence. We have some things to talk about. He looked around at the group before asking something that had been on his mind. Quick check. Are you a hive mind of some kind? Should I be addressing you as a group? Do you not... A girl in her early 20s, wearing a hoodie sporting tour dates from a metal band, started to speak before being cut off. The alchemist James had riled up weeks ago spoke. No, we aren't, he said with a sigh. He doesn't know, obviously. He spoke to the group at large, taking a swallow of his drink. Hello again, Columbia, James started. And yeah, that's sort of the problem, he added. We don't know anything, except that we know vaguely where you all come from. And honestly, that's scary, but I'm kind of getting the vibe that you aren't the civilization-ending threat we thought you were, so I'm trying to be polite. And part of that is knowing how to address you. He paused. Look, I'm kind of new to this. You're all obviously on edge. Why don't you ask me questions? You may call me Kondo, spoke the Japanese man in the tan suit from the kitchen counter he was leaning on. Are you here to kill us? Wasn't really planning on it, James said. So you're all individuals? Why the weird quiet and short sentences? Oh, we were wiretapping the house. Actually, sorry about that. Feels like a shitty invasion of privacy now. He rubbed his hands together in an awkward motion, like he could somehow wring the discomfort out. The alchemist, Columbia as a pseudonym, met James's eyes, and something shifted slightly, like a veil pulled just an inch to the side to show off something underneath. "We are new," he said in a dull, empty tone. "When we are our true selves we have no history, no development, so short sentences, less personality in the way." He blinked, and suddenly was who he had been the whole time. In a much deeper voice with some frustrated resentment in it, the old man continued, "So when you're around to fake it to, we'll use the faces, okay? Just save us all a headache." "Uh-huh. You sure?" James said, raising his eyebrows. "I'm fine with it if you want to be yourselves. I am literally the last person on the planet who would judge you for not being human." "We are human," three of them chorused at once in that dull tone. It didn't sound angry, but somehow James could feel the ire baked into the statement. So he nodded to that, too. "Okay, I'm fine with that." "You said we could ask you questions," the homeowner said, finally turning to face him, a wavering expression on her face. "Why did you track us down if you didn't know what we were?" "Well, to be clear, we tracked him down," James pointed at Columbia, "and then spooked him enough that he collected you, who we've been watching for a little while but decided to contact now." He stopped himself before saying more that might give away the limits of their information. "As for why? Well, Columbia more or less knows, and I assume told you. Sometime in the last year a friend of mine purchased a potion from the Guild of Alchemists which tried to kill me. They said it would cure depression, and I suppose that is technically correct." "The worst kind of correct," Frequency of Sunlight said smoothly from her spot on his left. There was a collective flinch through the room when she spoke. James ignored them, though, and kept talking. "Yes, exactly. So that began our espionage campaign against the alchemists, which has led us to here, now, and the question of what to do about a situation where they're selling potions that kill people and seem to either don't know or don't care." He looked around the room at the chaotic collection of people. "So I guess now it's my question, and I really need to know, what are you? Not just the basics, but what's the story here?" He asked into the quiet air, and then leaned forward to patiently wait for an answer if they decided to give him one. The group shared a number of silent glances, blank faces giving away nothing. The quiet of the room, aside from the rustling clothes and sound of people shifting on couch cushions, would have been overwhelming if James wasn't spending a chunk of his brain power reading messages through his skulljack from the others. "They sure seem to be communicating for people who aren't a hive mind," Alex had sent. "Are they lying about anything?" Frequency asked. "We should ask questions we already know the answer to." "Oh, yeah, also they were startled to see Sunny," Alex added. "They're not used to weird shit. They might think they're unique." "Well, had thought, anyway," James added to the conversation, keeping most of his focus on the quiet room. And then the woman who owned the house stepped forward and spoke up. "The alchemists made us to be weapons," she said. "Ah." James' blood went cold. "So they are killing people on purpose, huh?" "Doesn't track," JP sent to them through the link. He was still watching from outside, after all. "The other alchemists were legitimately confused about it," he reminded James. And in a few words, the woman speaking validated that. She shook her head and continued, answering James's question without realizing there was byplay going on. "They don't know that their project worked, that any of us are alive. We are a side effect." "A fortunately profitable failure." Columbia's voice was grimly bitter. "Okay," James said. "I'm starting to see the picture." "We..." Columbia faltered, and then wiped away the emotion to speak in his other, deader voice. "They were trying to brew a substance that would turn anyone. Instant conversion, sell to governments, intelligence agencies, drug cartels, warlords, whoever would pay. Who would not want the power to make your worst enemies share their secrets willingly, die for you willingly? They had a marketing campaign ready. I helped." They talked at a steady pace, not pausing when humans normally would. The first test was a perfect success. James gave a pitying frown. You? He asked. Someone else spoke up instead. A young man who looked almost perfectly nondescript. Short brown hair, sports jacket, jeans. Normal. And quiet up until then. Me, he said, in the same dull, non-voice. The woman behind the couch spoke again. And then me. And me, a scarred blonde woman chimed in. And me, a young man with a pair of tattoo sleeves added his voice. I came later, Columbia continued the story, switching back to human. The problem with making a potion that turns someone into the perfect infiltrator... He gave a sardonic grin and downed the rest of his drink. Well, turns out we didn't know a damn thing about what we were doing. Par for the course, really. The subjects lied, well enough that the guild assumed they had made a totally different potion. A few more tests and we had a product that was expensive to make, had a limited market, and just wasn't really worth producing a lot of. He glanced over at the homeowner. Our plan worked, she said. No more of us, we thought. So... James cupped his hand around his mouth as he thought. So what are you? Are you... Okay, when you're the potion, are you alive? Or is that just a catalyst for a change? Is there anything left of who you were? Because if you've got all their memories and feelings, how is that different from being them? He let his thoughts wander slightly to a question that had been bothering him, and gave it voice. One of the potion people shook his head. We can see who our victim was, they said, but it is distant. His voice switched to more human, and in a cheerful Mexican accent he added, like how reading Sherlock Holmes doesn't make you a druggy detective. Well, not right away, obviously. James gleefully returned the snark, before realizing that it wasn't real. Not really. Not in the same way he was used to. Okay, he said, his face falling. So you're new people then, just with a record of the body you're in? Correct, Columbia said. The book metaphor is good, actually, because on a long enough timeline we can understand the feelings of our victim, though we often don't have time alone to consider, and it does take time. You keep saying victim, James pointed out, taking a cue from Alex. Can we go back to the earlier question? Are you alive when your potion is brewed? No, the homeowner said, shaking her head in an elegantly precise movement. We become aware the moment they are beyond recovery. So why are there so many of you? Are you all test subjects? Also, I have to ask, why is there a dog? Everyone in James's link breathed a sigh of relief as he finally asked about the dog. There were multiple messages sitting in his field of vision about the dog. Again, it was the alchemist who explained, still using his human mask. We didn't stop, boy, he said bitterly. Oh, we convinced the guild, through lies and my own work as lead on experiments, that it wouldn't do to sell the potion to spies and murderers. A little luck and a little iteration, we ended up where it only appears a cult to those with mental health disorders, and I did some research into the base brew when I was by myself, but they wanted to keep making them. I made it expensive, but not impossible. He shrugged, setting his empty glass onto a side table as he switched back to non-tone. There were several more made, sold to wealthy concerned parents. He nodded to a young woman in the hoodie. Or to mentally collapsing executives, a gesture toward Kondo. Or, once we organized ourselves, bought by us through proxy, securing as many as we could to keep them unused. Okay, that's good, James said. Worrying, kind of, I guess. How many? No, wait, the dog. We wanted to know if we could coexist, the Hispanic kid said. So we tried guiding the process. Didn't work, just made another us. He reached down to pet the dog's head, but the motion was mechanical. So was the dog's reaction. A wagged tail that was too rote and repetitive to be a real enjoyment of the affection. James watched with a feeling in his chest somewhere between empathy and distress. his thoughts in conflict with each other as he sat on the normal couch in the normal house and faced almost a dozen constructed life forms that each required a death to be born. He'd already realized and decided they were people. What made a person in the end? It wasn't the body. There were plenty of people James knew personally with bodies far from human. And even besides that, infomorphs didn't even have bodies beyond the gray matter they borrowed, and they were often people. It wasn't the way they viewed the world. Again, infomorphs saw the world in different colors of idea. Planners seemed to see things as schedules and dates. Hidden saw secret places and escape routes. Pathfinder and the growing cartomorph in James's mind saw the world as a series of journeys and destinations, small adventures instead of lights. It certainly wasn't their point of origin. James had met too many people who devalued even human lives just because of what side of a line on the map they were born on, and he had no interest in joining their shitty, bigoted ranks. So, that was simple enough. These were people. But the question now was... "All right," James said out loud. "What do you need?" They all stilled, the veneer of humanity that they wore like masks slipping slightly as the creatures inhabiting the bodies processed what James had just said. "What?" one of them asked, with a little emotion that didn't sound like it was from the human they'd stolen, but also didn't sound like it was completely dead either. "What do you need?" James restated. "You guys aren't responsible for the actions of the alchemists. You aren't killers. From what I can tell, and what my rogue tells me, you're all more or less trying to live normal lives, except Columbia, who I assume is still an alchemist for... cover? Sabotage?" "That's about right." "Right. So what I'm mainly seeing here is that you are, collectively, victims. And you're constantly paranoid about being found out. Also, you said something about keeping a stockpile of more of your own origin potions, which is also an issue I'd like to solve, and... I mean..." He shrugged and looked at his two allies in the room. Alex leaned forward on the couch, putting her weight on her own crossed arms. "We help people," she cheerfully added. "Pathologically," Frequency of Sunlight supplemented the conversation with a nod. Everyone looked like they really wanted to ask about the Camerconda, but James had other conversational plans. "So, I almost died to the process that makes one of you, and that's an issue, but it's not your fault. You're as much victims of this as the people who died. The alchemists are killing people, and they're doing it because they tried to make life to be a tool. We have a very strong policy about that." His voice was hard, and it took a lot of effort to not glance back at Alex. "So we're going to have to deal with that. Columbia, or however you'd prefer to be addressed, your help would be appreciated there. But in the meantime, I mean, you're functionally refugees," he said. "The alchemists are almost certainly aware something is up, and that's our fault, so we're here to help fix that, and keep you all safe." James sighed and shrugged, spreading his arms in front of him. "I'm not sure how you feel about the lives you're living. Do you have families, jobs? Do you like them? We're going to have to talk about this, work some stuff out, but fundamentally, I want you all to be okay." He checked a message through his Skulljack link, and then added, "Also, we have a vault we can keep the potions in, along with the one that almost killed me, until such time as we find a way to hatch them properly." He means properly without killing anyone," Alex clarified, as she realized James had gotten sidetracked by his line of thinking and hadn't made that explicit. The woman in the stylish dress that looked like it had been spawned by the concentrated essence of the 90s gave him a long look. "You don't act like a normal secret society," she said flatly. "Well, we're not secret for one thing," James quipped back. "Very bad at the secret keeping." Then he realized what she'd said. "Also, how many secret societies do you know of, aside from the alchemists?" "None. So far as we know, they're normal." "Touché," James chuckled, ignoring that the reply hadn't been a joke. "You don't know what you're offering," the dog spoke up, and now it was James' turn to blink in mild surprise. Only mild, though. He had a more important thing to ask. "How do you talk as a dog?" he said. "I have a roommate who would like to know." A quick ping from Alex came through his link, and he got a series of short clips of them talking. Before anyone could answer him, he made the connection. "Wait, how are any of you talking? Half of you aren't moving your mouths." "We are inside the bodies," the golden retriever told him. "Okay, we'll table that for later," James sighed. "What do you think I'm offering?" Columbia paused in pouring himself more brandy to face James and speak with his dull voice. "You offer to stand against the alchemists. You do not understand what that means, what they do." "Make potions?" Alex spoke up sarcastically. James waved a quieting hand at her. "No, hang on, think about it." He addressed the potion people. "You said you were made to be weapons. That kind of implies that research and development is ongoing in the alchemist manner, huh?" "Correct," Columbia said. "You think they are old men selling minor magic. You do not know what weapons they have stockpiled." "I mean, I'd like to," James said, trying not to roll his eyes at JP's internal request/demand that he pry that information out of them. "I know they've got something that allows for selective corporeality, which is neat, but I mostly did assume that a lot of the potions they sold were minor things." "We sell what we can make on the cheap." Columbia's human voice took over, and he finished pouring his drink before offering the bottle around the room to the others, who looked at him with not quite human eyes and a degree of alien frustration. "A lot of that crap costs a lot to make, so it's not even worth selling to Blackwater or Castle. We keep it, use it to make Nobels." James leaned back, throwing his arms over the back of the couch. "So, a bunch of high-burst power foot soldiers, huh?" he mused. "I mean, how many do they employ, anyway? We have some experience with this. It's not a deal-breaker." 16, always, Kando said, bitterly. "He killed one, once." A tired-looking wisp of a woman spoke from the corner of another couch. "They just replaced it." Frequency pinged their link. "They keep saying it or thing," she mentioned. "Non-humans?" "Probably modified humans. Slave soldiers?" Alex's words showed her disgust even through the text. James sighed and rolled his shoulders to alleviate stiffness and addressed the room. "Yeah, I'm not going to let that stop us. Still in your corner. We've got—" "James!" JP's voice came through the link, cutting off everything James was saying out loud. An interruption, not a message this time. All three members of the Order turned as a unit to look back toward the front door, the sudden cut-off of conversation drawing concerned looks from the others in the room. "The police are here." "Why?" James said out loud, and to JP. "Why what?" "Not you." Alex silenced the question from Columbia. JP's response put James on edge instantly. "They're claiming the van was reported stolen by the company that owns it." "The fake plumbing company?" "Yeah." "Uh-oh," James and Frequency said at the same time, digital and organic voices overlapping, before James continued. "What are you doing about it?" "Cooperating, but they're going to open the back in a second. Also, Ben's not reporting in. At least one of our rogues is missing." JP paused. "I don't think this is normal. I don't want to send Dave and Penn away if it's going to get hot. How do you want it handled?" James stood off the couch, ignoring the flinches from the potion people. "Something's up," he announced. "Ready check." He pulled up the menu for his shield bracer, noting that he had a full 20 protective blocks ready to go, and 4 switches to new threats. Then he reached back and adjusted his holster, made sure his gun was in reach. "Do the alchemists know about this place?" he asked. "They shouldn't," Columbia said. "But you shouldn't either." "We were followed?" someone asked in a quiet whisper. "You brought them to my home." The tall woman's voice was in the dead potion tone, but there was a strange warble of emotion to it. Which made sense, somewhat. She was one of the oldest. They might be new, but she'd been around, and she'd been learning. Alex and Frequency of Sunlight nodded to James as they made sure they were prepared. Breath is full, Alex said. Stay behind me when somebody starts shooting at you. James didn't bother to deny that was a likely situation. Okay, James spoke. JP, breakthrough tactic. Overwhelm them. Get ready for teleports home. Links open. Stall for 2 minutes, then go. Columbia? Or... Ma'am, I don't know your name. May, the homeowner said simply. May, get the potions you have stockpiled. Everyone get up. We're getting out of here before it's too... From the street in front of the house there was a bellowing roar and the popping of gunfire. It was, perhaps, already starting to be too late. James watched through his skulljack as Dave and Pendragon exploded out of the back of the van, slamming the two muscled, bald figures that were wearing police uniforms but were not moving like cops down into the street. They were both wearing the fancy-looking face masks that looked like cyberpunk rebreather things, but their eyes shimmered with anger as they glared at the dragon that was holding them flat. Then, suddenly, one of them slipped out, the other following, both of them briefly fading to vapor under Pendragon's claws to roll sideways and reform slightly farther away, guns already out and shooting again. Oh yeah, James bit the words out. They know you're here. The people in the room jerked to their feet, trying to spread out, looking to each other and the members of the Order with blank, confused expressions. Only Kando, tan suit jacket hanging open, grip of a handgun visible in his waistband, seemed like he was at all prepared for the chaos. James kept talking. Everyone get moving to the front. We're going to evacuate you all. Wait for them to disable the ghost cops before you leave the build. The side window in the kitchen exploded inward, cutting him off. Frequency of Sunlight, whipping her head around with lightning reflexes, zeroed in on a small object just before it dipped below the kitchen counter in her view. A gray cylinder with a metal handle coming off it. A grenade of some kind. Maybe non-lethal, but not good either way. I got it. Alex ducked past someone who was stumbling toward the door, the wordless motions of the potion people making an eerie scene as they all started moving without speaking. She checked line of sight through her link with Sunny, and then grabbed the grenade in a way that didn't obscure anything, and started leveraging herself against it. When the Cameronda let go of the object, Alex felt a spike of pain in her hand as she absorbed the force it had been holding on to, and then applied her own in reverse, flinging it back out the window before it exploded in a burst of sound and light a second later, the noise loud enough that it left her ears ringing. The next volley held 3 more of the flashbangs and came from 2 other windows, showing that the house was thoroughly surrounded. James stood in the hall trying to usher people toward the front door. Alex was covering the back, and he saw her shield flare suddenly through the link and end the corner of his eye. The sound of small arms fire filled the home as Kando took a stance at the shattered kitchen window, firing through it with his handgun before a bullet hit him in the neck, a thick spray of scaled black blood exiting his body before slowly being pulled back in. He didn't stop shooting while it happened, except to reload. Go, commanded the thing wearing the form of a Japanese businessman in an empty voice. There are no bells. I will hold them. 3 people in the garden, closing in, Alex reported after peeking the window. 9mm SMGs. They look like the dudes up front. James tried to breathe and found himself coming up short. Things were getting too chaotic, too fast. 5 threats around the building, with the element of surprise, too. They needed to get out now and regroup. He had 1 telepad, JP had another, Dave the third, just barely enough for everyone, and they couldn't afford to split their forces. He needed a tactical decision, and quick. Alex and Frequency could hold the house behind him. He needed to clear the way through the front. He spoke the command over the tactical link and started moving, gun already in his hand, to the front of the silent pack of human-shaped people. They looked equal parts terrified and resigned as the sounds of combat picked up around them. James dashed through the front hall of the house toward the door to give JP and Dave some support, and was a bit surprised when a humanoid figure in gray-black fatigues blurred through the wall under the stairs to his right, and immediately swung a glowing red right hook at his head. "No bell!" somebody yelled. James' eyes widened as he barely managed to mentally scream at his shield bracer to switch from blocking bullets to punches, but didn't have the time to hope that would work before the punch connected. The golden dome of light around him was blinding, but James kept his eyes open as it soaked the blow, and miraculously also deflected the secondary effect too, though not the stomach-churning blast of noise that came with it. When the dome dropped, the hallway around him had been blasted away, varnished wood splintered in a semicircle around where his shield had sprung up, the edges of what was once a structure glowing cherry red, some of it straight up on fire. His shield had successfully blocked the punch and the explosion that had followed it. "Oh!" James exclaimed as he realized what had happened. His gun was already aimed in a one-handed stance when the shield came down, and he just unloaded repeat burst-fire shots into the man standing before him, only having enough time to realize that most of them were just phasing through before another punch was sent his way. A quick left hook that James shot, rapidly shifting targets to the fist itself. These bullets actually landed, though they drew 2 small pricks of red out of the oncoming arm before his shield triggered again. James tried to pivot to slam the man into the wall, and was half successful. When the shield flashed down a second later, the house was even more on fire around him. The chandelier in the entry hall making glass chimes as it rattled overhead, half of it seeming to have shattered in a blast wave, but at least his target was half buried in the wall. "Everyone go!" James yelled, closing the gap as he kept shooting. He had plenty of gun bangle charges. He could at least keep the bastard pinned down. People started running past him for the front door, and James had no time to focus on them. His opponent lurched back to his feet, breathing heavy through his gas mask, long hissing breaths as he took stock of James. "Yo!" James said, mugging for time as 2 more people slipped past behind him, trying desperately not to think about the fact that he was standing in the middle of a small ring of burning building. "So, do you want to try—" The man sucked in a breath, a small plume of vapor coming out of his mask, and his skin warped into a stony substance, one fist starting to glow red again, while the other brought an MP5 up to bear down the hallway. "Nope!" James flicked a hand, and the chunk of asphalt that he had pulled from the road outside spiked through the gun and wrapped around it in a ball that also attempted to clasp around the man's hand, while his own reloaded pistol took another trio of burst shots into the man's annoyingly ethereal face before his enemy took yet another swing. James braced for the shield to flare up, but then the alchemist foot soldier held back his hit and kicked James in the gut instead. James slid backward into a burning wall, knocking over a potion person as he coughed up a mouthful of spit, a few cinders falling on his head from overhead. He wanted to know how everyone was doing, but he had to cover the last 2 people out the door. Everyone else was spilling out into the street, and he heard a roar and the scream of metal as Pendragon threw a car at somebody. They were probably fine. They had a dragon. He had a pistol and an immortal angry ghost who was trying to kill him. The man stepped over him, aiming another kick to James's head. James dropped the gun and caught the foot in both hands before the leg turned to mist, and the man flipped it back down to bring a knee up to his neck instead. James grabbed that and rapidly yanked the enemy fighter off balance, using the force to start rolling forward, sweeping his pistol up as he went by. This fight was going nowhere. He could do this all day, thanks to endurance at its 2nd tier, but apparently so could his opponent, and if he couldn't incapacitate or kill the Nobel, then doing this all day was a failure state. The others, though, were apparently not having the same problem. "One down," JP pinged over their link, James barely processing everything going on. The fight had rapidly gotten out of hand, but he could see Alex and Frequency's views shift as they pulled back from the back of the house and started moving toward the front door, toward him, and the 2 potion people cut off from their escape. One of his opponent's hands was still encased in road. Maybe it holding the gun was what was keeping it stuck. James didn't know, or care, but he did know he had to shift the fight out of the way so the last people could get out of here. His opponent had clearly figured out that he probably couldn't kill James right away either, so uncaring of James's interference, he pivoted and slammed his fist into the closest potion person who was trying to find an opening to slip by. James screamed something incoherent, tried to open fire, but his bullets barely moved the arm that he could actually hit while it was in flight. When the strike connected, he got to see the explosion of flame from two angles as the ball of fire spilled over him, Alex, and Frequency of Sunlight all at once. It stung, and he felt splinters pelting his exposed skin, but it was fast and it didn't kill him. But he hadn't been at the center of the blast. When it cleared, the two people who had been holding back at the mouth of the hallway were just gone. They had died silently, without even screaming, the support beam overhead creaking as it swung down and phased through the monster that was standing there. A man who had just murdered two people without a word, leaving nothing more than charred chunks of flesh on the ground around. "Red light!" Frequency screamed from down the hallway. And then, an equally screaming Alex slammed a kitchen knife through the man's jaw just as James shot him in the head repeatedly. A human turned into a gory mess of meat in a heartbeat, blood and brain matter spraying into the building that was now burning in earnest. "Two down," James hoarsely spoke over the link. "JP, situation?" "JP's out," Dave said, almost calmly. But James could hear the shake in his friend's voice. "I'm covering the last one out here. Penn says actually EMS are coming in, minutes at most." His voice stayed mostly level, even though James could hear him reloading and firing in the background. "What do you want us to do?" "Telepad out with the rest. We've got the house," James said, fumbling his own telepad out with stinging fingers. In the hallway, Alex threw up on the corpse, leaning against a crumbling wall, ignoring the splinters. "Kando's dead," she coughed out. "We're it. There's two more coming." To punctuate her words, another flashbang went off in the kitchen, causing everyone's ears to ring. "May ran upstairs," James said. "Let's move." "Here," a voice from overhead caught his attention, and he looked up to see a woman whose home was burning around them, standing behind the upstairs railing, holding a briefcase. "I had to get them," she said. "I'm ready. We can—" Her voice was cut off as a hand reached out of the wall behind her and grabbed her around the neck. She didn't even react to it, except to meet James's eyes and release the briefcase over the edge of the upper floor, just before the masked soldier flexed his hand, and she collapsed in a boneless heap, before the Nobel began putting bullets into the body. A methodical execution that did not even pause as James attempted to lay down suppressive fire up the stairs. Frequency slithered past and grabbed the briefcase as James kept shooting, and Alex frantically made sure their destination was written correctly on the telepad. "We're ready to go," she yelled. "Look out," Frequency cried as James tried to get close to them. From down the hall, from the living room that had been so homey and normal not even 5 minutes ago, a masked bald man in gray-black fatigues was charging toward them. Another one, red light simmering out of the skin of a cocked fist. In a smooth motion, Alex flipped the telepad back over her shoulder to be caught by James, stood up to her full 5'5" height, braced her feet, and extended a single flat palm toward the charging brute. And like she had all the time in the world, Alex breathed. James hadn't ever actually gotten around to asking what spell she had gotten from the mountain, from the book that he had made from his own endurance power. But in a flash, the temperature of the whole house plummeted, the fire burning around them fighting the sharp and sudden chill, as Alex shifted slightly, like she wasn't sure of where her feet were, but then twitched her hand just enough to catch the thrown-empowered punch. As she exhaled and the spell took hold, for just the barest instant, the charging man made contact. Alex timed it perfectly. The punch stopped. Just stopped. It wasn't deflected or canceled or grounded out. It stopped. For one moment, Alex was inviolable, immovable, invincible. Then her breath ran out and she half collapsed back to be grabbed by Frequency and dragged to the floor next to the corpse they had made, thrown down at James's knelt feet. Her attacker didn't fare so well. It turned out, when something stopped a mass of kinetic energy, that energy had to go somewhere. In the instant before Alex fell over, in the instant that the punch met her open hand, the assailant's arm and half his torso pulverized itself. A spray of blood and bone chunks thrown backward by the rebound of punching what might as well have been a particularly irritated mountain. Down the hall, the other soldier paused, showing the first sign of concern so far that anyone had seen in one of them. Behind them, James saw an older man in a pressed black suit stepping through the wreckage of the patio door, dusting himself off like he was on a park stroll, and not walking onto a battlefield. James recognized him from one of JP's intelligence briefings. Alchemist Amazon, one of the upper echelon of the reclusive gang of wealthy monsters. James wrapped a leg around Alex, tagged a hand on Frequency's head, gave the alchemist the middle finger with his hand holding up the briefcase, and tore the telepad with his teeth. This was going to be a bigger mess than normal.